I have been battling with this idea of creating a video about AI data centers and the technology and power generation and storage and things like that for probably, I don't know, the better part of 2, 3 months now. Luckily enough for me, I've been blessed enough to be able to have some really good contacts with some people that are involved in a lot of this stuff to really understand and learn more about what these things are doing to our communities and the risks and the rewards and all of that. And really, the strongest position is that there's a lot of benefits and a lot of legitimate risks and really a lot of rumors that confuse proposed projects with projects that will actually be built. When people hear that a data center, a power plant, or a battery storage facility is coming to rural Texas, the typical reaction is usually one or two extremes, right? It's that it's going to destroy our community or it's going to bring billions of dollars and solve all of our problems. Well, the truth kind of falls in the middle, right? There are real benefits and there are real concerns, but I think it's really learning about where the tremendous amount of misinformation being spread about these projects falls and where the actual truth is and why these projects are coming to rural Texas, right? So Texas is growing and we all know that. And the demand for electricity is growing with it. And really, we're adding people manufacturing oil and gas facilities, semiconductor plants, crypto ops, data centers, AI infrastructure. I mean, ERCOT reported in 2026 that it was tracking somewhere around 410 gigawatts of proposed large electrical loads. Roughly 87% of that is associated with data centers. And that sounds terrifying until you understand something very important. 410 gigawatts doesn't mean 410 gigawatts of data centers are actually being built, right? That number kind of represents projects that are seeking some type of interconnection. And many of those projects, or proposed projects at least, compete for the same sites. Power and transmission capacity, right? Some will be delayed, some will shrink, some will move, some won't even be built. Texas has actually created a lot of new processes to study very large loads together rather than simply just allowing every proposed project to connect individually. So the rumor that ERCOT has already approved hundreds of gigawatts of data centers and they're all coming online is simply false. So let's go over some of the different things that come with some of these proposed centers. Pros, right? These projects can represent some pretty large private investment. We're not talking about a Dollar General or a Dollar Tree, which almost always are right across the street from each other. We're not talking about those coming to town, right? We're talking about a major data center campus that can represent hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of investment in land, buildings, electrical infrastructure, equipment, technology, all of that stuff. I mean, Texas's own qualifying large data center program requires at least 500 million of capital investment to receive in its large project certification. Now, I want to pause for a second there because this kind of falls in line with one of the biggest concerns Texans are seeing in property taxes, right? This investment actually helps reduce property taxes and reduce the amount of funding that schools depend on with property taxes, right? It can help really fund this stuff, right? Again, I'm not here to propose for or against. I'm just trying to put something in like a layman's explanation to people that are trying to figure out what the hell's going on and understand pros, cons, and what the middle ground really is. So understanding that these massive investments, it goes towards this stuff, right? It goes towards new schools, it goes towards new school programs, it goes towards reducing property taxes, maybe even eliminating property taxes. But that's just part of the argument, right? It's just really kind of figuring out um, what the investment can really bring to the table, especially with trying to understand what that kind of capital investment can bring in large project certification, right? So that can basically dramatically expand the taxable property base, right, of a rural community, depending on like project agreements, exemptions, abatements, things like that. It can bring in substantial tax revenue without bringing thousands of new residents, right? Instead of having, 1,000 new homes, one data center could potentially fund that, right? Fund what 1,000 new homes would typically fund, right? And that's what's really attractive, especially to rural counties, is saying, hey, we want to do manufacturing facility or data centers or whatever. Um, that can bring in employment, it can bring in tax opportunities, it can bring in revenue without bringing the influx of people, right? So it's kind of trying to figure out a balance, right? It's like a manufacturing facility, right? They can employ 3,000 to 4,000 people, but it can also require like homes, roads, schools, services, whereas a data center can effectively put in like an enormous amount of capital investment on a relatively small piece of land while requiring really like a much smaller permanent workforce, which you'd want to be restricted to Texas residents, right? Now that can be a benefit or it can be a criticism, right? Depending on how much you really look at it. So the community really needs to ask, how much taxable value are we actually receiving, right? What exemptions or abatements are being granted? How much goes to the county, the school district? What do we as taxpayers need to provide, right? Infrastructure wise. Those are the questions that I think are better to ask with whether or not data centers are good or bad without getting into the infrastructure, water, electricity, stuff like that, right? Construction, what's going to create significant temporary employment, large campuses, that's going to be electricians, plumbers, concrete crews, heavy equipment operators, welders, HVAC contractors, engineers, security, all kinds of other trades. Now let's dispel another rumor, right? $1 billion data center does not necessarily mean thousands of permanent jobs. Like that's crap. That's just not true. Um, Texas has its own incentive requirements that demonstrate this, right? It's like a qualifying standard conventional data center can meet program requirements with like 20 qualifying permanent jobs. While a large qualifying data center, I think they call it a qualifying large data center project, that requires at least like 40 qualifying jobs. Now these jobs must meet wage and longevity requirements, but they're nowhere close to the employment numbers of like a giant manufacturing plant like we see in Toyota. So when someone claims that a data center is going to create thousands of permanent jobs, that's just, in my opinion, it's not accurate. And I would tell that person, show me the employment commitment, right? Like show me what the commitment is. One of the biggest concerns we get asked about is electricity. Now this one's legitimate, 100% legitimate, especially coming off of 2021. Data centers can consume a ridiculous amount of electricity. Like a 500 megawatt campus, uh, really operating near capacity is somewhere around 500 megawatt industrial load. I'm not an electrician, but that sounds like a lot. Now that's why Texans, rural Texans specifically, are justified in asking, like, who's building the generation? Who's building the transmission? Who's paying for it? Does the increase hit my electric bill? What happens during a grid emergency? All of these are legitimate questions. But another rumor really needs to be corrected here in that a developer cannot simply build a big ass data center and then just plug it into the nearest transmission line and start drawing energy. That's just not possible. Texas has really cut back on that. 2026, the Public Utility Commission approved ERCOT its new batch zero process for projects of 75 megawatts, which I believe I'm using that correctly, or larger. Now, ERCOT studies these projects collectively to determine just how much load the grid can support, where it can support it, what transmission improvements will be required. They've even identified like technical situations where large loads that are dropping off simultaneously could threaten grid frequency, right? In other words, ERCOT is very aware of the problem, which is crazy to think that a government entity actually knows what the hell it's looking at, but it looks as if they do, right? That doesn't mean that you and I and our neighbors shouldn't scrutinize every single project. I mean, hell, we should scrutinize anything that gets built, right? It really just means that the claim that nobody's considering this is just it's just not true. Like it's just, to be honest, it's just bullshit. Like you see people rage baiting and posting on the internet that they're doing this without our permission. This is just not true. Like there's literally a process that all this stuff has to go through over and over and over again, and it goes down from ERCOT down to your city manager. There's so many people involved in this: state legislature, federal legislature, congressional reps, state reps. Like there's just so many people involved in this. It's not just they're just throwing them up and nobody cares. Like these are discussions being had in a public forum all over the state. It's just that we as citizens don't typically go to these things. It's just not something we show up for. City council meetings, commissioner court meetings, we don't go. We don't show up. And so they're kind of set to make a decision whether we like it or not, right? And then when the decision is made, we fly off the handle like, "Whoa, I can't believe you're doing this." Well, where were you? Like, we need to be more involved, and that's why people get frustrated with me because I'm so involved in legislative measures, federal politics, local municipal politics. But this is why I've had the ability to sit down with just under a dozen different groups from state legislatures, federal legislatures, cabinet members, land acquisition firms, data companies to ask these questions to learn what the hell all this is about. I've got clients that are landowners being approached all the time that need to sell. They want to sell their land, but they don't want to sell to a data center because they're afraid their family or their friends are going to hate them because they did it. And it's not fair to landowners because landowners have property rights, and this is an opportunity for them to make what could be generational money. So it's really about being more involved. And so I just want to dispel some of this stuff, put some information out there. You take it for however you want to take it, and forget about it. Give me the middle finger or absorb it and say, man, that actually makes sense, right? So one of the other things that comes up a lot is, what about the power plants that are built with these centers, right? Well, there's a discussion there that becomes a whole lot more interesting, right? So like a 500 megawatt data center that demands somewhere around another 600 megawatts from an already constrained grid, that's one thing entirely, right? But a development that brings substantial new generation, that's a very different proposition. Now, if a project wants to build like a natural gas generation or solar generation, battery storage, or some combination of that, we would need to calculate that net effect on the grid, not simply just quote the data center's maximum electrical demand. So if you're bringing a new electrical consumer into rural Texas, one of the most reasonable things the community could potentially demand is like, show us where your power is coming from, right? Battery storage. That's probably generated more misinformation than anything else, especially in Wilson County. Battery facilities don't manufacture electricity. They're like a giant lithium battery for your phone, right? It's a giant rechargeable battery. So when electricity is plentiful or inexpensive, the batteries charge. When the demand rises, they can discharge electricity back to the grid. That can help stabilize the grid, right? Support renewable generation and provide power very quickly when electricity really is needed. But batteries aren't magic. And this, I want y'all to just step back for a second because I know you heard me say green. This is not a for against green renewable. I don't care about any of that crap. Go nuclear, because that will fix everything. But I'm just kind of breaking down what kind of falls in line with this, right? So batteries, they're not magic, and they run out of energy, or stored energy at least, and they got to recharge. And lithium ion batteries can carry a big risk, right? Especially fire. So battery fire can be pretty damn impossible to extinguish because of the thermal. I think it's called runway or something like that. Which is why communities should demand like setbacks, fire suppression, emergency response plan, firefighter training, water management plans, compliance with different fire and electrical standards. Saying battery facilities are completely harmless is, I mean, it's wrong, right? Saying they're essentially giant bombs waiting to explode it's also wrong. The correct real question is what technology is being installed that could, and what safety standards apply, and really what is the emergency response plan, right? Then you go to water, which is another area that both sides massively exaggerate. Some data centers can use a ridiculous amount of water for cooling. I know for sure. I've seen it. I've talked to companies that run those. Others use what they call as like a closed loop system, right? Air cooling, hybrid systems, or reclaimed water that can dramatically change like the freshwater requirements, which is a big deal, especially in rural Texas, even after all the rain we've had. So you can't honestly say that data centers just use normal amounts of water, and you can't honestly say that they don't use water. So it depends on the facility, right? For example, like a proposed rural Texas project, we need to demand actual numbers, right? Where's the water going to come from? How many gallons per day? How much is consumed versus recirculated? Is groundwater being used? Is municipal water being used? Is reclaimed water available? What happens in drought conditions, right? Or drought restrictions? those answers matter way more than national averages, right? And then you go into the argument that they're getting massive tax breaks and they're paying nothing and all of that stuff. And that's really misleading too. It kind of goes to the development model, right? Texas provides a shit ton of incentives for qualifying data centers. It's true. Should they? Should they not? Well, we'll get into it. I mean, qualifying data centers can receive exemptions from Texas 6.25% state sales tax or the state sales and use tax, especially on certain equipment, right? Electrical systems, cooling, even electricity itself. Even larger qualifying projects can receive exemptions lasting 15, 20 years. That's no different than HEB or other big corporations that do this stuff. They get the same exemptions. And that's real. And we as taxpayers should absolutely debate whether those incentives make sense. But that doesn't mean that the property itself pays no local taxes. Um, Local property tax treatment, incentive agreements, all those other arrangements need to be examined project by project. So the right question isn't, are they getting a tax break? The right question really is more about, like, what taxes are being exempted? What taxes will be collected? What is the community receiving, right? What are we getting in exchange for um, giving up this ability to build where we're at? And then this whole, they're going to take our land. Okay, first of all, this isn't like the utility lines, right? Private data centers, they cannot simply just condemn your property, right? This isn't transmission infrastructure, right? It's very different. Now, transmission infrastructure could create a problem there where new generation and large electrical loads, they can require massive transmission lines, substations, easements. I mean, you see it all over the countryside. Certain utilities and transmission providers, they can have condemnation authority after going through a regulatory process. So people worried about transmission easements across rural property, that's not imagining an issue that doesn't exist. That's real. That we're seeing that in West Texas coming down on the Blue Lacy project, right? But we should really distinguish between data centers, the property itself, and the transmission infrastructure that's really required to serve that region. They're related, but I mean, I guess legally they're not really the same thing. I think property values are going to collapse is another argument that people see, and it's harder to claim that categorically, right? Nobody can honestly promise that a large industrial facility next door will have zero effect on someone's property value. Noise, transmission lines, lighting, substations, industrial traffic, visual impacts that can absolutely affect individual properties. At the same time, billions of dollars of new investment, new infrastructure, tax base that can increase the economic activity and land demand elsewhere in that same community, therefore raising property values somewhere else, decreasing them here. And then you go into the argument that I think a lot of people try to make of, well, you already think your property values are too high. This could reduce your tax burden based on value and what they're willing to give back. So again, there's a double-edged sword here, right? But that impact is so extremely location specific, right? So instead of making sweeping claims, just look at setbacks, look at landscaping, noise studies, lighting, transmission lines, corridors, neighboring land uses, and kind of here's where I land, right? I'm neither for these projects nor am I automatically against them, right? Texas needs electricity. Texas needs new generation. Texas needs economic development. And whether we like it or not, America is going to build enormous amounts of computing infrastructure over the next 10, 15, 20 years. But rural Texans, us, like that live in the country, we shouldn't be expected to just accept every single project because somebody attaches the words economic development. I've said it for years. Economic development is real, but there should be a way for us to do it our way. Developers should have to answer some very straightforward, no bullshit questions. How much power are you consuming? How much generation are you adding? Who's paying for the transmission infrastructure? Where's your water coming from? How many permanent jobs are being created, not just temporary? What taxes are you going to actually pay after you get all these incentives? What are the noise, lighting, environmental impacts? What happens to neighboring landowners? One of the things that I'm seeing a lot with land acquisition firms that are pursuing data centers is they're buying not just the parcel that it's going on, but hundreds of acres around it, right? To create a buffer zone um, around those properties that, and they're paying well above market value for these buffer zones. But that creates distance so that you can't see these centers or you can't see what's going on or try to minimize the effect it has on surrounding property owners, right? Um, then some of the questions like what's the fire and emergency response plan, right, for battery storage and these ESDs, right? And I think most importantly, really, is what do we get out of it? What does this community get in return for hosting it? Those aren't anti-business questions. They're really responsible questions. I mean, rural Texas doesn't have to choose between screaming no data centers and giving developers a blank check with our tax money. Now there's a third option too, right? Make them prove the project is good for us. Bring the investment, bring the generation, bring the tax base, protect our groundwater, protect our landowners. Don't shift billions of dollars in infrastructure costs onto residential ratepayers, and be completely transparent with the people who actually have to live next to these facilities. Now, if a project can meet those standards, let's talk. Let's then talk about tax abatements and tax exemptions. If it can't, then we should have every right to say, why should we accept it, right? A few factual anchors, ERCOT told the Texas Senate in April that it was tracking about 410 gigawatts of large load requests, roughly 80% of that being data centers. But just remember, with most of what you're hearing right now, with Blue Lacy, data center, those are requests, not 357 gigawatts of guaranteed completed projects. I think in June, the PUCT approved the new batch process of like 75 megawatt loads, and that was specifically to determine what quantities and location the grid can reliably accommodate, right? And as of August, ERCOT has paused advancement of data center large loads through that process while conducting additional verification ordered by the governor that's being attacked for this. Um, the jobs tax break portion is also important because I think it's frequently overstated on both sides, right? Texas official program requires $200 million and 20 qualifying jobs for a standard qualifying data center. I think the large project category is, I have it somewhere. I think it's at least $500 million in like 30 or 40 jobs. So billions invested can be true at the same time that not many permanent jobs is true, right? So I think there's a lot that we need to look at and we need to really understand as we move forward in this debate and in this and providing context to everything. And I think it's really important that we as citizens, we need to stop ignoring things until we're rage baiting into taking sides. I think we need to be going to city halls. We need to be going to commissioners' courts. We need to be going to city council meetings, going to planning and zoning meetings, because all this stuff is there. It's in the minutes. It's publicly available. It's out there for all of us to see. We just need to know where to look. And I think municipalities, city councils, commissioners' courts, they need to be more, I'm not going to say transparent because they are transparent. They need to be more transparent. Let's just say that. But they need to be more public facing with putting this information out there, creating summaries of meetings and conversations that they can post on social media that can be shared so that people don't take snippets and things out of context and post it here and just rage bait people into believing that data centers are bringing crime and killing our water sources. And like there's just so much more information out there. That's why I struggled with the idea of putting this out on a video because I am in real estate, right? I own real estate. I sell real estate. I work with ranchers. I work with farmers. This impacts everybody. It impacts my business. I mean, I've got people that are looking at offers from these land acquisition firms, and I've got people that are like mad at me because I bring these. So it's my job is to bring these offers to people. Um, it sucks. But listen, this is where we're at. Every time you get on one of these or one of these laptops, it uses a data center somewhere, right? Um, we have to, do we want to benefit from it or do we want another country to benefit from it, right? Or even weaponize that against us? It's such a tough conversation to have, but I think having the right people communicate the right things is what we really need. And I mean, at the end of the day, whether we want it or not, it's coming. Development, economic growth, whatever. At some point, it's going to be here. But we have the ability to control that. If we step up, elect the right people to represent our interests, and take control of our local utility providers and make sure they understand that we are listening, we are speaking, and we understand. Um, so, anyways, I hope that was informative. Again, it was a 26-minute video. It's just too long for people to sit and watch all day, but I tried to be as unbiased as possible to break down different things and hopefully it helps you understand better. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you are watching this video, you probably know who I am or you know where to find me. My name is Chris Jacobs. I'm a realtor. I live in Livonia, Texas, but I work all over South Texas from Waco all the way down to the valley. So I do a lot of work in the rural communities. So I'll be happy to answer as many questions as I can or put you in touch with the right people. So appreciate you tuning in and hope this video helps. Thanks.